Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is artist Omar Khouri. Born in London, Khouri spent his childhood in Lebanon. In 2002, he graduated from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston with a BFA in illustration. After spending a year in Los Angeles working in cinema and television, he returned to Beirut. In 2006, Khouri co-founded Samandal Comics Magazine, the first experimental comics periodical in the Arab world. He is one of Samandal's many international contributing artists to this day. In 2010, Khouri's sociopolitical satire Utopia won Best Arabic Comic Book at the Algerian International Comic Book Festival. His work spans many art forms, including painting, comics, animation, theater, film, and music. Khouri is currently artist in residence for the U of O Comics and Cartoon Studies program. He's producing a UN report on the right to food in comics form in collaboration with law professor Michael Fakhri and English and Comic Studies professor Kate Kelp-Stebbins. This work is in conjunction with Professor Fakhri's appointment as Special Rapporteur on the right to food for the United Nations. Thank you, Omar, for coming on the show. It's great to have you with us, and it's great to have you in Eugene.
It's a wonderful place. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us first a little bit how you came to be an artist. Tell us how you came to that vocation.
Well, the shortest answer is I just never grew up. Like my family, my parents were always encouraging us as kids to draw and play music and just kind of be like that. But it was, just to have some culture alongside. But my brother and sister grew up, and I just stayed a kid up until this very day. So that's really what it comes down to. So
I mentioned that you work in all these different media, but let's talk about comics. What sparked your interest in comics?
Well, comics was one of the things that were available to us in Lebanon during the Civil War. There's not a lot of entertainment, not a lot of up-to-date television or books or anything like that. It was a harsh Civil War, but we did have Tintins and Asterixes kind of in the around. We had some Arabic translated Supermans and Batmans and stuff like that. And I also had cousins and friends and stuff that would, whenever there's a little lull in the fighting, they would come and visit, who lived abroad, and they would bring books and comics and video games and cartoons and stuff like that we usually get. So they were kind of like these, rays of sunshine in the middle of the storm of bombs and bullets that I kind of latched onto. And and then as I was saying, I just kept drawing and never stopped. It was, I guess, a product of my middle childness that I wanted to stand out in some way. My brother was just a very kind of, like a tall, good-looking, sporty, intelligent guy who was like winning at life just as life packages winners to you. And so, my sister was the little princess of the family, and I had to find a way to stand out. So I kind of leaned into the art.
So what inspired you to come and get a degree in the United States?
Well, again, growing up in a war-torn country, I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to leave, and so I tried my best to convince my parents to send me abroad and pay for me to study being an artist. But they didn't really like that idea. So I did 2 years of economics in Lebanon first. Okay. And my parents, lovely people, they don't have that much money, so there was also part of it, like they couldn't really afford it. But then at some point when I was like 2 years into my failing economic studies, they realized that this isn't going to work out. It's the opposite, like almost literally the opposite of what I wanted. And so, they just kind of borrowed some money and sent me off to Boston, which was where my brother was now doing his master's. They're like, we'll send you to at least to a place that we know that somebody's there and you can be safe. So that's how I ended up in Boston studying illustration.
And then, so you get this BFA and then you go to work in LA. So
yes.
So what'd you do there?
Well, my final project, so I was doing this final project that I wasn't really enjoying in mass art. I was getting sick of illustration, and I was leaning more towards painting and stuff. So I wasn't really gelling with the program. So I wasn't kind of that into the final project that I was doing, and a friend of mine who actually lives here in Eugene, his name is Omar as well, funnily enough. He's one of my cousins, but one of my best friends as well. He had written a script that was getting, that people wanted to option instead. It was getting like a lot of interest, but he didn't want to sell the script, he wanted to direct it. He had graduated from Emerson a couple of years before, that's also in Boston, and moved out to LA to start his career. So he asked me to do if I could do some storyboards, some concept art. It was a science fiction movie. When he pitches the movie, just to show them that he has a vision, because he didn't have any experience doing a Hollywood feature-length film yet. So I'm like, oh, perfect. I'm sick of my project. This is a cool project for me to do. So I used that as my final project, and I drew all the stuff and I sent it to him, and we worked over the phone a lot. And then he pitched the movie, and it got picked up. And he's like, all right, well, as soon as you're done, pack your bags and you're coming to LA for a year to shoot this Hollywood movie. It was kind of surreal and amazing. The movie's called The Final Cut, starring Robin Williams, and yeah, it was kind of like a dream come true. I feel like I kind of jumped from the first level of going to the United States to like the final boss, right away, to use video game terms. I was just like this 24-year-old, 23-year-old guy who was just like, what? Where am I? All right, awesome.
So you're working with Omar, you're making movies in LA, but you decided to go back to Beirut. So what made you decide to go back?
Well, it's kind of like, it was time for me to re-examine my just absolute shunning of everything Arabic and everything back home that I was, when I went to the States. It was like, I got the relief that I needed just being at a distance, and I just started to think about, all right, starting to slightly be politically aware and understand why these things are happening there in relation to, everything else in the world. So I thought it was time for me to go back and make peace with my younger self in a way, and this place that I come from, which, is an intrinsic part of who I am.
So you go back, and then you decide you're going to found Samandal Comics Magazine. So tell us about how that came about. What inspired that? How did you make it happen?
So when I first came back, I was more, again, I was as a result of shunning kind of illustration of college, and I was learning about painters and like real art, and, this kind of, I'm like, oh, comics is kind of for kids, and video games is kind of for kids, and they're not as serious as a Picasso or a Monet or like, So I was leaning more into painting ever since graduating. So I went back to Lebanon. I was being a painter more, and I had my first exhibition there, which was kind of successful, and then I had an exhibition in New York of paintings after that, and I had 3 months in New York as a residency to kind of work there while my show was going. And I was walking around, looking at exhibitions in galleries. New York is like the center of the art world, basically, these days, or at least back then. I'm not sure if there's a center anymore, but. So I was just kind of walking around, and although I just got really disillusioned with it, just so much money, like this kind of, I'm like, oh, economics is the opposite of me being an artist. Originally, it just started I started understanding that actually painting is the most capitalistic thing that you could do. It's just like so directly capitalistic like that, and I was just kind of getting ickied out about the whole scene of being an artist. So. I'm like, well, so while I was in New York, I was kind of going back to comics and thinking about this, dystopian comic that I've been in the back of my mind. I'm like, I wanted to write it, but I needed to be serialized. So, and there's nobody that serializes comics in Lebanon. There's barely anybody who does any comics in the Arab world at all at that point. So I thought, well, the only thing that I can do is start a magazine myself. I'm sure there's other people who feel the same way as me, who want to do comics in a serialized way, and kind of interact with people, learn from each other, because there isn't really a tradition, so I wanted to build that tradition as well while learning. So I was in New York and pubs as I was hating on painting. I was like sketching ideas of like, you know, the names of a magazine and like how it would be and working on my thing. And so as soon as I came back to Lebanon, I pitched the idea to a couple of my close friends. It was Hatim Imam was the first person that, well, the first person is called Tariq Nab'a, who was like my mentor in comics when I was a kid. He was like 3 or 4 years old. He was there just for a quick visit, and I pitched him the idea, and he thought, awesome, let's do it. And then he moved to Brazil. So then Hatim Imam was moving back to Lebanon after studying in England, and I pitched him the idea. He thought it was awesome, so me and him did like a year of just researching and meeting people and introducing the ideas around, whatever. And then on our way, we got Lena Mirhij to join us, and Fadi, the Fids Baqi. And we were like the core founders of Samandal, who, yeah, and after a year of working in 2007 was our issue 0 that we put out, and people really enjoyed it. So we decided to, yeah, go all in, and so that's how it was born.
The rest is history.
The rest, as they say, is history.
So let's talk a little bit about Utopia. Tell us about that comic.
Yeah, Utopia was more, so this dystopian comic that I was doing in Samandal, basically originally, which I built Samandal just to house it. It's called Salon Tariq al-Khurafi, and it has 2 main characters called Sura and Lulwa. And they're college kids, and they're trying to fight this kind of dystopian 1984-ish system, almost. I didn't really have time to actually do the comic because the Samandal was volunteer-based, and so I had to lug magazines and read hundreds of comics to see which ones go in, and design and translate and do all this stuff, and go get, you know, beg for money, of course, for every issue. Yep. So I didn't end up being able to do comics in Samandal, because then on top of that I had to get a job, like, you know, actually do paying work. So I wasn't able to maintain that serialization. But what came out of it was that somebody approached me from a newspaper, an online newspaper called Al-Ra'i at the time, and they were like, oh, we'd like to do kind of a serialized thing. We'll pay you money to make comics. Basically, this was my first opportunity to do that. So, and it was right before the Arab Spring, and everybody was feeling like something needs to change. This was around 2009, because the Arab Spring really happened in 2010, but my run was 2009, 2010. It was just like a pan-Arab feeling that this is, you know, it's become too much. All the systems aren't working for anybody, and it's time for us to do something about it. So it came from that, and it was these 2 main characters from Tariq al-Khurafi as little children. And the idea was they basically, the first comic is them complaining that they hear their parents complaining about the country, that, you know, it's unfixable, and, you know, everything's corrupt. And so the 2 little girls decide, we don't want to inherit such a, you know, crappy country. Let's start our own country. And it was kind of an innocent way to think about how to build a country from the ground up, from, you know, first principles, if you will. So it was like kind of an exercise in that.
So you've spoken about these 2 projects. They're both fictional, but you also do nonfiction narrative as well. First, what makes, in your view, why is comics a good medium for doing nonfictional narrative?
Well, first of all, there's a number of reasons. But my first one is that it, in a way, is a declaration that, look, journalism and nonfiction stuff doesn't mean it's objective. And drawing is a very subjective medium, obviously a subjective medium, versus photographs, which lie to you and, you know, fool you into thinking that they're being objective, but they are also very subjective in their own way. So comics at least puts that lie aside and is clear about everybody who's doing something has an opinion about it. You're not in a vacuum. I have a personality, and it's coming out through the writing and through the work and stuff like that. Second thing that I think is that there's an eternal childishness to comics. this is something new that I've been thinking about, because I spent most of my career trying to convince people that comics is also for grown-ups. It's not a childish medium, you know, it deals with serious subjects. But recently I've been thinking that no, actually the childishness of comics is one of its strongest suits. And for nonfiction comics, it speaks to somewhere in you, the child inside of you, which is, to me, that's the person who believes they can change something. Because the grown-up is change yourself to fit the world, whereas the child is, oh, the world is malleable to me. You haven't yet discovered that the world is a rigid thing that you're just going to keep slamming your heads against. So I think that makes it, you know, it just kind of speaks to that child in me, no matter how serious the topic, no matter how dark or how grown up or philosophical. There's something about the way it's, pictures simplify stuff, you know, we know this. Books that have pictures in them are for kids, and, you know, so that it makes it easier to understand stuff that is illustrated. So it simplifies stuff that is complicated and inaccessible and speaks to the child inside you, which somehow awakens that feeling of, wait, maybe I can do something about this. That's what I really like about it, and I think where the real power lies.
Yeah, great answer, really interesting. So some of your non-fictional journalistic work is included in this traveling exhibition, The Art of the News, Comics Journalism, which originated at U of O, curated by Kate Kelp-Stebbins. So let's talk a little bit about your work in the exhibit, the first piece in the exhibit of yours, Unstoppable Force. Tell us a little bit about that comic.
Well, it's done in collaboration with a journalist and a good friend of mine called Yazan al-Saadi. I do most of my nonfiction comics with him. And it's part of a triptych or a trilogy, if you will, of pieces about Lebanon since the economic nosedive that started mid-2019 and that led to an uprising, a revolution, whatever, protest, whatever you want to call it. It's just kind of a vague thing. And so since then, we've been doing pieces about Lebanon for the Nib. And Unstoppable Force is the second one in the series. So the first one was about what led directly to the protests and the breakout of the protests that lasted until COVID closed them down, basically for like 5 or 6 months. We closed down the whole country, and there was this huge movement of, you know, our Arab Spring was about 5 or 6, well, like 7, 8 years later than everybody else's, but at least we got there. I think it's because we have a democracy versus other people that have but our democracy is terrible. Anyway, we'll talk about that in another question. But so Unstoppable Force is the second in the series, which was published originally in the Nib's. The Nib is an online platform, but also publishes print issues. And they had a pandemic issue, and they commissioned us to do a piece about what the pandemic was like. And in Lebanon, there was the whole economic collapse, and then there was the pandemic, and then we had the biggest explosion like ever to happen, you know, that is a non-nuclear explosion like ever to happen in history. I mean, I think it's maybe the 5th or something, but we like to exaggerate as Lebanese people. It's the biggest ever explosion. But it was huge and it was terrible, and in the middle of like this already nightmare that we were living through. And
say why it happened. I mean, explain where this explosion came from.
The explosion, the investigations, you know, were kind of not very conclusive, because the people investigating are the government, which is the corrupt people who's basically, it's their negligence that made it happen. It was a small explosion that happened in the port where there was a warehouse of neglected, excuse me, I tripped over that, neglected chemicals in a warehouse. That just caught fire and exploded.
And they had been warned about this for years.
Been warned for years, and the president, like, and the head, I mean, even like a month, it wasn't like a long forgotten thing. You know, the president got something on his desk about 2 weeks before, the prime minister about like a couple of weeks before. It's not, it wasn't like, oh, something lost to history and it happened. So yeah, it's just kind of the gross negligence, which is somehow the worst violence ever. That you can have. It's just like, well, we don't care. Explode, die, all of you. We don't care. Yeah. So that happened amid of all this stuff. So this was the subject of our the middle of our three comics about Lebanon.
You want to tell about the third?
The third one which is the last comic that we did for the Nib before the Nib unfortunately stopped commissioning comics and closed down. That one's called Living in Lebanon is Not a Game, and it was basically about. It was formatted like a video game. It's about daily life in Lebanon. It's about how we had this year we had earthquakes. I'm sure you guys heard about it. Like they're in Turkey and like all around that region. But we also got aftershocks and stuff for about like 2 or 3 months. There was just like shocks on top of the economic collapse, which just kept going deeper and deeper. And there was a gas crisis had happened recently, and it was just. Life was getting really difficult, and we wanted to express that again. And we have like 5 or 6. Like the Lebanese lira dropped about from 1,500 to the dollar to about 150,000 to the dollar in the span of like a couple of years. But there was no official government exchange rate. There was like 5 or 6. So every place you go, there's a different exchange rate, and you have to have like dollars and Lebanese, and keep calculating the differences between them everywhere you go. Like, oh, here I should pay in Lebanese. No, like 3 Lebanese and $5, and so just kind of it was all getting really tense and anxious. I was anxious all the time. So I created this thing where I made it look like a video game to soften it to the Western audience in a way, to kind of house it in, it's not just, it's such a dark subject to just keep talking about how terrible our lives are. And so Yazan writes almost an article, and then I take it and I'm like, what is the visual metaphor that it can live inside of it so that it could be interesting and not just kind of me illustrating what he's saying, just to have 2 levels. And so I added an anxiety meter. So everything that you do adds anxiety, to you. It's kind of like like a little video game where you're walking through the country and just a day in the life of.
So as I mentioned at the top, you're currently artist in residence for U.S. Comic and Cartoon Studies program, producing this UN report on the right to food in collaboration with Michael Fakhri and Kate Kelp-Stebbins in comics form. So tell us a little bit about that. What have you been working on? How's that going?
It's a difficult thing to do. UN reports are opaque to the layperson in their best forms. But Michael wanted people to benefit from his reports outside of the UN. He didn't want his work to just kind of sit on a shelf, make his reports to the UN, and then nothing happens. Nobody does anything about it because, I don't know, the UN is not really capable of doing anything, as we're seeing more and more these days. So he wanted it to be accessible to the people and to the public. And so he asked me what do you think if we do them as comics? That was a really, really good idea, so that people can understand that there is something to do, like there is good. When I read the few reports that he's done already, there's hope in there. There is no scarcity, like you can really, literally feed people. There's no need for people to be hungry and starving and dying. This is a myth that corporations create and governments create just to be able to control the narrative. But it's not true. And there are a lot of systems in place that could actually make it happen. So I found that, striking about the reality. Like, I didn't know that. I just thought it was all terrible and there's no food and we're all just gonna, more and more hungry. But there is enough food for people to be fed diversely, and it's healthier in a healthier way for their stomach biomes. And there's research that I'm reading about that, also how healthy your gut biome is related to your depression, related to a number of diseases that weren't originally thought to be related to what you eat. And so I thought that was a really, as somebody who has a lot of stomach problems myself, found this to be kind of uplifting as a message, and I wanted to help him bring that about. So that's for so as a special rapporteur, he's at the UN for 6 years, and he has to do 2 reports a year. Until the last year, he has to do 1 final report that kind of covers everything that he's done. So he wants that final report to be done in comic book form. And so I'm here now at the moment doing kind of experiments to see what would work for this kind of report. It's a difficult thing to do because it's just, you know, a list of things almost, and it's hard to think of it as a narrative thing or as a visual thing even. So at the moment we're doing 3 short comics as tests to see what might work for us, and we're using what is happening in Gaza right now as like a case study to show. We're doing the 3 comics we're doing is one is about violence in the food systems, and one is about fishing, and one is about seeds. And these are 3 reports that he's already done. The reports throughout his mandate are themed reports. So so we're doing these little 3 things, which will be appendices to his next report about starvation that he will be submitting by the end of the year, as a way to start to sneak comics into the UN's radar and see what their reactions would be like. We're using them to prove to them that comics is useful in this way. That, okay, even though there's like the Security Council, which is the thing we hear the most about the UN, isn't able to do a lot of things. It's just vetoed automatically by whoever feels like, whatever colonial power is unhappy with anybody's request. And so it's just a way to show, well, maybe the UN proper like that is not very successful. But there are things around that could be helpful, and there is hope for the world if you look into these people's work. Like, there are some people who are doing it in good faith, being a UN person. So, yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do right now.
And are you going to then do if you succeed in convincing the UN that comics is a legitimate thing, are you then going to do the final report in comics form?
Yes. Yes, which should be out into 2026. That's when he's going to put out his report, and we're still seeing if he can only purely do it as a comic and submit that, or if he was going to have to submit it as a text regular written report, and then we do the comics report externally as something that just kind of reports on it. Because what he explained to me is that's what everybody in these kind of mandates do. At the end, they like publish a book about the stuff that they've gone through, and so that's the external thing that people read about them. So we're hoping that we can just have it as a comic report, just officially in the UN library, but that's not yet 100% sure.
So we're almost at the end of our time, so this will be the last question. Are you working on anything else in addition to the project that you're working on with Michael? Or maybe the better way to ask this is, what are you going to do next? I'm working on a number of things, but what I'm most excited about right now is I've been thinking about this project right now, which is an extension of what I've been talking about in a way, and a lot of people that I'm meeting, I'm proposing this to them, no matter what their background. Some of them are neuroscientists, particle physicists, graduate students, Michael, or a director, or somebody who does comics. I want to have a discussion with people about what they think a good destination for the future of the world would be. Because it's not something that I'm unable to think of on my own, like what is a good world? Because right now we're heading towards a nightmare, and we're unable to focus on what that final destination is because we're putting out fires the whole time, and our focus is quite short-sighted, and we're protesting because people are dying. And this is necessary to be done. But if we just do that, we're still going to end up going to this terrible place. But we're going to stay on, we're just kind of using the steering wheel to just stay on the road for now. But I want to find a way, like a new destination, so we can go off road and go to it.
and I don't think that it's not me trying to save the world or anything, but I think the more people around the world can think about like what is that good destination for us in the future, the better it, you know, the better it can be, the more options we can have, and you know, I don't know. It's just like exceptionally ambitious. It's daunting, but you know, we got to do it. A lot of people think that, yeah, maybe that's too big for me to think about. But the child in me, the forever child that didn't grow up, is like, no, I could change the world. Let's change the world. So that's what I want.
Okay, Omar. On that note, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's always a pleasure to talk to really interesting people doing really interesting things, and you are both.
Thank you so much for saying that and for having me. And yeah, this place is lovely. I'm really enjoying Eugene and this university. So thanks a lot. It was wonderful talking to you.
I've been speaking with artist Omar Khouri. He is currently artist in residence for the UO's Comics and Cartoon Studies program. He's producing a UN report on the right to food in comics form in collaboration with law professor Michael Fakhri and English and Comics Studies professor Kate Kelp-Stebbins. This work is in conjunction with Professor Fakhri's appointment as Special Rapporteur on the right to food for the United Nations. Thanks so much for watching.